A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 74. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. How's it going, John?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good.
No immediate complaints.
A clear horizon. No concerns.
Something,
What was that?
I wouldn't go that far, but...
God, it was some documentary I watched, and it starts off with a quote from... Oh, you know what it was? It was the Stone Roses documentary. Were you a Stone Roses fan?
I got into them late. So I liked them, but I got into them very late, so I didn't get into them when they were good.
Trust me, I got into them 6 months ago, so there's no... They have this documentary about their reunion, and it starts off with this quote from basically Alfred Hitchcock talking about how he can't stand having something on his mind. Kind of basically, it's that's what I like that quote. Is the best times when you don't have anything to worry about on the horizon, nothing to worry about in the past. And he said something about how it was pretty rare to be in that place, but that has nothing to do with anything. But you're good though, right?
I will say that deadlines are very helpful for motivating at least me to actually get writing projects done. If I have a thing and it's just I need to finish it, but I might have a year or so before I have to finish it. It's not getting done. But if it's I have 2 months to finish this, I'll move my ass. So that's what's been happening, and it's actually been good. It's I actually enjoy writing this, and I remember that I enjoyed writing this, and I should have done this a year ago. But that's where I am.
That's good.
Yeah.
So, I guess we have an I don't even know. I haven't... Sorry, brain fart. So one of these weeks where it's mostly just news that we're going to talk about today. And like I said, we talked a lot of comics last week, and there is one comic out, but we decided to table that for another week. So it's just a lot of things going on in the realm. But I will say, before we get into Star Wars stuff, I kind of wanted to get your feel on this, because I know you're a fan of the original. Have you seen this thing, this announcement that Denis, I think it's Villeneuve, the director of Sicario and Arrival and the soon-to-be released Blade Runner 2045, is supposedly, according to many media sources, is taking the reins for not David Lynch's Dune, Frank Herbert's Dune. He's going to
Dune, eh?
Have you seen this news?
I have not. And I will say I have not seen any of this guy's movies. I wanted to see Arrival, and I guess there's still time for me to see Arrival. It's still on theaters, but I just haven't seen it yet. I absolutely will see Blade Runner 2049 when it comes out, even if all the reviews say it's terrible. I'll go see it.
Because you got to see it.
Because I got to see it. But Dune, eh?
Yeah. So I guess I will just say that my reaction is kind of immediate anxiety, because it's why is this guy? Why does he get to take is it going to be another JJ thing where it's one dude takes the reins of everything, and
right. He's like the thinking man's J.J. Abrams, where like he only takes on the brainier projects like Blade Runner and Dune and whatever else.
Yeah, he's the guy that went to a slightly better school than JJ or something like that.
Well, he's French.
Oh, he's French Canadian. He's French Canadian. So, and that's a whole different.
That is different, but the Americans don't care. They just see a French name and they go, "Oh, he must be French."
But I'm just like, that's the weird thing with Dune. It's like they kind of talk about it, kind of in the same way that they talk about Lord of the Rings. They called it almost the unfilmable book, even though it's been made into movies. It's like it's almost impossible to keep the tone of the book in the movie. And I mean, I know like a lot of people, every time you see one of these clickbaity kind of things about like movies that were absolute disasters when they came out, and Dune always seems to be listed in that. Did we talk, maybe we didn't bring this up, but I always was kind of hoping that they would kind of go in the Sci-Fi Channel direction of doing like a longer piece when they finally, I know Peter Berg was kind of, he was in the pipe for doing this for a while, which, he's kind of, I think that was before he made Battleship or whatever, the one that the Liam Neeson, Milton Bradley combination film.
Right. But that historic, finally two legends together, Milton Bradley and Liam Neeson. I will actually just real quick. I saw Liam Neeson is doing, I don't know, he's making some movie called like Hard Powder, and it looks like any other Liam Neeson movie come out of the last 10 years. And it was like, oh, finally, Powder gets his revenge. they made a sequel to the movie Powder, and this time it's personal.
Yeah, this time it's powdery.
Yeah.
Oh man, Powder. Oh gosh.
But I doubt that it's actually a sequel to Powder, but it should be. It absolutely should be like a gritty reboot of Powder.
He's back and he's looking at guys in the shower all over again.
Yeah, I think a gritty reboot of Powder is exactly what our society needs today.
I forget how that movie ended. Did he just disappear in a lightning bolt or something like that?
Yeah, something like it just kind of ended. Like he just, Powder's gone.
I feel bad for that movie because, Sean Patrick Flannery did that thing where he shaved his head and shaved his eyebrows, and he probably thought he was going to get an Oscar for that. And then when it came out, it was like, this is...
Everyone just made fun of it.
And of course the director had his own histories, which probably sunk the movie.
Yeah. But so back to Dune.
Yeah.
Because this is a Star Wars podcast, so let's get back to Dune. So I'm reading about this now. So it was announced via a Brian Herbert tweet, who has @DuneAuthor as his Twitter handle. Part of me is like, come on, guy. You're not the real Dune author. Like, you're a Dune author, but you're not. You're not the one everyone thinks about.
That was my dad.
Although at this point he's probably written as many or more.
He's written Dune like 10 times as many Dune books as his dad.
Him and Kevin J. Anderson. Anyway, so the tweet says, Legendary Pictures has signed the very talented Denis Villeneuve to direct the exciting new Dune series film project. So the fact that it says Dune series makes me think like they're going to try to get it more than just one movie out of this, that they'll try to film at least the original trilogy, and I'm sure Brian Herbert is going to like try to get some of his stuff.
Oh yeah.
He's written into movies. I mean, but I to your point about how you film it, I mean, I think, and I hate saying this because I didn't like when they did it with The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, but I feel like they almost need to make a prequel movie that's just about all of that historical stuff and the backstory and the journal entries of everyone in the first novel. Like to give some backstory about like, all right, here's the world and here's just how it came to be to this point, and now let's watch Dune, which starts from where, kind of drop you into it.
Yeah.
But, so have like, I mean, I don't
That actually raises an interesting. I'm sorry.
Like a Dr. Kynes movie, like a Liet Kynes movie, like where he's the hero. He's kind of.
We get to hear about his imperial conditioning.
Yeah,
like up close.
Right, like he's the imperial planetologist. He shows up on Arrakis, and about him learning the history of Dune, and then that's the prequel, and then Dune. And then we get the Atreides family story. I don't know.
I have to jump in because I just made a faux pas. I attributed Dr. Yui's imperial conditioning to Liet Kynes. I don't know. No, this is what happens when Star Wars guys talk about Dune. Sorry. Yeah. Oof.
Well, apparently, and as I say that, apparently there is a prelude to Dune prequel trilogy. We've talked about it. Like I stopped reading the book. Like I've read the original trilogy of books, and then by that point I was like, all right, I think I've gone as far as I can go. So I don't necessarily mean that they should film that, but maybe they'll try to condense that into a movie.
Yeah, I think that's why they should have done.
But certainly if they're like, oh yeah, let's make 5 Avatar movies now. Like I'm sure they'll say they'll at least write on a piece of paper, we'll make at least 3 Dune movies,
I find it interesting that they make this, that they don't want to move in a kind of a television direction, because I feel like there would be nothing more appropriate than kind of doing it in a long form, because even the Dune books aren't in the movies. There's sci-fi trappings, there's space travel, there's high concept costume design, things like that. But I don't believe it's anything that a person couldn't achieve on, say, like a Game of Thrones style budget. And it's not like at this point in 2017, Dune is a gamble. I mean, it's a beloved book. It's been around for almost 50 years, or maybe more than 50 years now. It's been translated into dozens of languages, and it's like I feel like the only thing bringing this to the cinematic screen is going to be to disappoint. I think we're already at the point where where the idea of having long films is starting to fall really out of favor now. It's people don't want to be committed to a 3-hour movie when they go. And I don't think there's any way you can tell the story of Dune, even the first book, in a 2.5 hour movie. It kind of needs to be long. There's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of trappings.
And then if you split it up and do like Dune Part 1, Dune Part 2, that's not satisfying either,
Yeah, and that's a real kind of, last weekend I was watching, I've got like a free trial of HBO Now, and they had one of these, what is it? I don't even know what the series is called. It's the Insurgent, Allegiant. I forget Anyway, famously, not famously, but recently the third movie came out in that series, and it was like there's 3 books in the series, but because of Twilight and Hunger Games, they decided to split that third book into 2 movies. Well, what happened, they ran into this real big problem, is that the third movie underperformed so much that it wouldn't be financially feasible for them to finish the quadrilogy, as somebody else penned that word. And it's like now they're like talking about doing it on television, and the original actors who are kind of their, it's like Miles Teller and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the star's name, but she's a movie actress, and she's kind of like, I'm not doing TV, because they know that they're not going to be getting movie money, and they're not going to have a movie budget. So I always worry that if they, said, oh, we're going to do a multi-film thing on these Dunes, like, well, are you going to do a movie per book? Are you going to split them up? How are you going to split them up? I mean, Sci-Fi Channel did a condensed version of Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, which I think actually worked, but a lot of the trappings of the book got tossed out, but they were able to kind of, condense those 2 books into like a 4.5 hour miniseries pretty well.
Yeah. But I mean, I think you're right about maybe going the TV route, especially, I've talked about Dark Matter, but there's also the show The Expanse, which, it got renewed anyway. It seems to have...
Have you seen that yet?
I haven't. I read a bunch of the books, and then I got kind of bored with the books and was like, man, I don't really care about seeing this on TV. But yeah, I mean, so and Dune is it's a little more, there's a little more like sense of grandeur to it than The Expanse, at least up to a certain point with The Expanse. So, their costume budget would probably be a little higher, and maybe their set budget, but I think certainly it does seem pretty well suited for TV, considering you have this like palace intrigue component to it, and then you have this like mystery of who are the Fremen, and who are these worms, and what does the spice do, and and then you have battles occasionally, and I mean, I think in that Game of Thrones, or even Expanse or Dark Matter vein, I think it's doable. I mean, Dark Matter, I don't get the sense that their budget's pretty big, but they have now this kind of imperial ruling family and planet that they talk about, and like I said, Dune's costume budget and effects budget would probably be bigger than Dark Matter, but I think it's doable for a reasonable amount of money, given how cheap effects software is these days. I mean, if you get someone who's really good and you get a really good art department, I think it's probably, I think you're right. I think it is probably doable, just so long as you kind of recognize it for what it is, the people working on it, and saying, all right, we're trying to, we're not trying to build this like huge grandiose set and show off and really live up to everything this could possibly be. As long as you keep that in mind of like, yeah, this is for TV, and so maybe we'll have to make a few compromises, but we can still just find really good art department, really good costume and hair and makeup people, and that have experience doing, working, on a limited budget and pulling rabbits out of hats. And yeah, I think you're right. I think that could be maybe the way to go. That would ultimately be more satisfying, and even maybe draw in some new fans too. Because I feel like with a movie, maybe you're like, all right, yeah, it's another Dune movie. Remember, they've tried this multiple times before, and part of that story is like, yeah, this is a really complicated story, and so that, including that, and talking about that in context of a new movie, that people may read that and go like, oh, this is a really complicated story. I don't know if I want to sit through a movie like that. But if it's a TV show and you can say like, okay, this is going to play out over a longer span, and you're going to have time to sit with it and like be with the show and figure it out as you go, then maybe they'll open it up to some new people who may not go see it as a movie.
Yeah. And it's just, I don't know. I feel like people are, whoever is in the creative driver's seat, so to speak, of this property, I think there's, on some level, they're just kind of obsessed with this idea of it being cinematic experience. And they're like, even in the compromises that Lynch had to make back in the 80s, the Paul Atreides character that Kyle MacLachlan played, I mean, obviously he was in his 20s when he did this, but he was supposed to be playing, someone maybe in his late teenage years, but in the book he's like 14. And if they did it as a TV program, it's like they could, the person, they actually be one of the few opportunities where you could cast a 14-year-old. And then like when he comes back for the second season, it's kind of like, oh, he's grown up. Mm-hmm. It's not like that thing where it happened on Lost, where there was the character that played Walt, who would they actually literally had to write the character out because he had a huge growth spurt. He was supposed to be like this, 9-10-year-old kid. And he looked like a man by the time they had him check in at one episode. And it's basically, unfortunately, he aged himself right out of the role. But like I said, I mean, I could talk about Dune all day, but it's, I guess what I really wanted to put out there is like, are we kind of moving this thing where now people are like, they just pick a guy and he's like, JJ reboots the big properties, and this guy Dennis, he does the little ones, and it's like, and now they've got their fingers in the proverbial highs of my childhood, and I'm like starting to get nervous. It's like, why is there only like, why do they seem to always kind of, you know, like Zack Snyder? Why did they give that guy so much control over the DC universe, which, you know, I'm not a huge fan of that, and I'm not going to belabor too much about it, except for, I mean, look where we're at this week. I mean, I don't know if people have read, but, you know, Ben Affleck has now stepped down from directing that movie. I've heard, you know, this is not, I wouldn't call this a rumor, because it was somebody actually had a conversation with. So, and I don't think they're in the film business, but he had said he had heard talk that he might actually be stepping away from even the role.
Oh, wow.
It's like, you know,
well, because his statement about not being director was like, well, I have to, you know, given the amount of time that both of these things require, I want to make sure I can devote all my time to playing Batman well.
Yeah. And it's like,
not Batman well, the Tick character, but Batman well.
I forgot about
Batman. So then if he like steps down from that, I guess it's like, well, guess you couldn't do it.
Well, somebody that I've you know, I follow on Twitter had said basically his theory is that they're gonna put out the movies like the Justice League and the Wonder Woman, and then they're just gonna kind of retire this version and then kind of go lick their wounds for a couple years and reboot it in a different way. Which you know, that's an interesting it's an interesting take, and just to turn this around and get this back into, you know, the realm of Star Wars, you know, I hope that the higher ups, and I know that they're every indication has been that the folks at Lucasfilm are very conscientious about this. Like, they do not want to be stuck in these kind of unfortunate, you know, situations where, yeah, I mean, Star Wars movies don't end up in development hell, as the term is, like, you know, say Dune or the Dark Tower series that's being done with McConaughey and Idris Elba right now, which that I mean, I think that would be the closest to Dune in the sense of like this kind of thing where they've never actually committed the Dark Tower to film yet. Well, now there is, but for a long time I think that was being developed as a TV show as well, but by I think Ron Howard's company. I don't know. I think Affleck was going to direct that at one time too. So these properties that are like these sticky properties that people like spend a ton of money developing and never get. I just hope that, like, say like the Boba Fett movie that people are thinking about, like, isn't going to be like one of the Star Wars version of development hell. It's like, are they going to do it? Are they not going to do it? I still think they should I still think they shouldn't just do a straight up Boba Fett movie. I think they need to do like a bounty hunter movie, but
yeah.
Anyway, I guess I tied that all in together. I don't know. I just had the thought before the show, and I wanted to kind of get your ideas about what your thoughts about Dune as a cinematic experience again.
Yeah, I'm open to it. I mean, I think I like the Lynch Dune. I mean, it's not, I wouldn't say it's like a great movie, but I enjoy it, and it's like there's not a campiness to it, but like acknowledging that it's like, yeah, there are parts of this movie that aren't great. Like, there's still a lot that's cool visually there, and I guess I'm worried that like anytime I see they're remaking Dune, I'm like, all right, they're going to go like over the top serious, and there's not going to be anything fun about it, and they're just going to like make it look like the Lynch movie. And what's the point of making a new one if that's what we're doing?
Exactly. And, you know, even in the book, I have like one of those making of Dune books. And even in that, you read the interview, and this is obviously before the movie came out. You know, Lynch was, at least in the interviews on set, was over the moon about how much fun he was having. And he was like, I'm committing to doing Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. I could do Dune for the rest of my career.
Yeah.
And that's obviously before you hit the editing room, but it's like these things they start out with the best intentions, and you know, maybe they could save themselves the trouble by realizing it's not going to work as a movie. I don't think, not unless you go in a kind of very different direction. But let's talk Star Wars, because that's what
Star
people come here
Wars
for. So
speaking of new movies coming out, we have several Star Wars movies coming out in various stages. I guess we're at the point where, so now The Last Jedi is in post-production.
Mm-hmm.
The Han Solo movie is now in production, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then I guess, has episode 9, has that gone into pre-production yet?
Oh, it has to be. It has to be, especially considering, certain logistical issues they've had to deal with.
Right. And then the next standalone movie is being written, we know, because Simon Kinberg posted about it several months ago.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, like you said, there's not really a lot of development hell for Star Wars anymore, Not that there ever was, because, George Lucas just spent all of his money to make these movies, but
right.
Yeah, I mean, they're still making sure they're moving through the pipeline and nothing is getting held up. Or if it does, like the Boba Fett movie, they pull the plug early enough that it doesn't hold anything else up. So to that point, Last Jedi, episode 8, Star Wars episode 8, The Last Jedi, directed by Rian Johnson. Rian Johnson did an interview with Empire Magazine, which I guess it's them and Entertainment Weekly are basically the go-to places when Lucasfilm wants to put Star Wars information out there. And so Rian Johnson did an interview with Empire Magazine, and there are kind of two things that came out of that interview that a lot of people picked up on that I think were kind of the most interesting. One is on the movies that he watched kind of in preparation. And I think Gareth Edwards talked about this a little bit too with Rogue One, kind of, what films might we know of that would give us a sense of what the Star Wars movie is going to look like. And then Rian Johnson also talked about writing Star Wars dialogue because, he's kind of known, he's also writing this movie and episode 9. He's kind of known for his dialogue, and which is very different from Star Wars dialogue. So, or from the way George Lucas writes dialogue, let's say. So on that first one, the movies he watched in preparation, he said 12 O'Clock High was a big touchstone for the look and feel of the aerial combat as well as the dynamic between the pilots. And 12 O'Clock High is about a group of bomber pilots in World War II. And so, kind of going back to some of the influences on George Lucas, those World War I, World War II aerial combat movies. What I think is interesting about this one is that it's about bomber pilots. And so I don't know if that is like a clue or a tip off about new ships we might see, because why would you need a movie about bomber pilots if you're just having X-Wings again? So if it's a tip off about new ships we might see, or if it is a tip off that, he talks about the dynamic between the pilots. So I wonder if we're going to get to see a little more of Black Squadron, and which they've certainly, at least initially, they were starting to build up with this Poe Dameron comic, but they've gotten away from that a little bit. But if the dynamic between the pilots, I feel like you don't really have to watch a lot of movies to just replicate the cockpit dialogue that we've gotten, in episode 4 and 6 and I guess maybe a little bit of 7 and Rogue One, just for people to go like, oh, he's on my tail, like, watch out, I'm going down. You don't really need to watch a whole movie to get a feel for the dynamic between the pilots. So maybe that's something that we're going to see a little more of. We're going to get more of a sense of these other pilots just outside of combat, and so that was maybe, I haven't seen 12 O'Clock High, but that I thought was interesting about that.
Yeah, I was thinking, and if I've seen it, it was like 30 years ago. It's been a while, but I keep remembering that there was I think there's a sequence that has been repeated as a clip for it, where Gregory Peck, I think he was the star of that, right?
Yeah.
Basically, there's a scene where it's like a briefing scene where they're all in one of those, pilots briefing, bomber briefing, and he can tell that like morale is low, and and he basically gives them one of these old World War II kind of admonishments of like, like, who do you think you are? Like, your life's so great, kind of thing. We got a job to do, and let's go.
Right.
Kind of like, we've got this to, we've got to drop a bomb out there, and blah blah blah. And I was kind of thinking like, wow, if that's what he's, and at least from what you put the quotes, that more it's the aerial combat and the dynamic. So maybe that speech isn't actually an influence, but I think like, boy, that's kind of a bit like the Rogue One thing, where it was kind of like where Cassian was like, we're thieves and murderers and stuff we've done for the right cause, and now we're ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. So it's like that kind of attitude. Like, are they going to be, is the resistance in episode 8 going to be a bit more like the rebellion was in Rogue One? That kind of like, once they've kind of broken the seal on this exciting, like, go for broke kind of rebellion that we always thought was in Star Wars, but we never really got to see it until Rogue One. And it's like, I wonder if that's going to maybe kind of inform, now, they never really dealt with the fact of the fallout of what, and they didn't really in episode 4, but they didn't really deal with, like, say, the reaction of the galaxy to, like, hey, wait a second, somebody just blew up a bunch of planets. The movie was moving, Force Awakens was moving such a clip, there really wasn't anything other than to kind of be, like, upset about it and move on. But I'm wondering if now that means that the galaxy is going to be in this different posture of kind of they are going to take up that the mantle of being kind of more of a rebellion. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. I haven't seen the Samurai or to Catch a Thief, which you were mentioning.
Yeah, and so I did, to prepare for this, I did watch those. So the other two movies, as you say, one was Three Outlaw Samurai, which is a 1960s Japanese, as you would imagine, samurai movie. And he says he watched that to get a feel for the sword fighting and a general sense of pulpy fun. And then he watched To Catch a Thief, which is a Alfred Hitchcock, Cary Grant movie for the romantic scale and grandeur. And so, the Three Outlaw Samurai was a prequel movie to a TV show. So basically, they made a TV show about these three samurai who kind of wander around Japan, helping people in need. So kind of like an A-Team, or I don't know. I feel like there were a lot of those kinds of shows in the 70s here in the U.S. about, such and such drives around the country, and then he runs into like, a Vegas showgirl whose father is in deep to the mob, and so they help out, or a school teacher who kids keep dying of drug overdoses, and so they help her get the drug dealers in jail, they're like that kind of stuff. So that was the show in Japan, and actually there were two versions. There was the original version in the early 60s, and then I think it came back in the 70s. But in between then, they made a movie that was kind of the origin story for how these three samurai met and joined up together and started working. And so, I mean, the movie itself is good. There are some really great camera work in there and really interesting shots. For the sword fighting, what I thought was interesting about it, and I hadn't seen this movie before, and so this was kind of what I keyed in on, because that's what Rian Johnson said he keyed in on. The way Gosha, the director, films some of the sword fights is there's not just kind of horizontal, the two characters moving across, left to right or right to left across your field of vision, but there's also kind of back and forth either towards the camera or away from the camera, which, maybe you get a little bit of in some of the other Star Wars movies, but I feel like you don't get a lot of that. And so that could be really interesting if he brings that in. And then also there are a few instances where Gosha puts the camera kind of down towards the character's feet and not like shooting up, where it's like a low angle shot and you're, so the character seems really imposing, but like right at, around the ankles. And so then you see them, kind of backing up towards the camera or moving away from the camera. So, the sword fighting itself, it's certainly not like it was in the prequels where, you had all this fancy flying around and kind of multiple styles brought in. The sword fighting style, and I'm not an expert on any of this, either from the film side of it or from the the fighting style side of it. But the movie itself, it's a lot of the sword fight. It's a lot of quick and violent, and a lot of kind of like slashing motions, which isn't to say it's like wild and out of balance or off kilter or kind of erratic or anything like that. I mean, it's still kind of very purposeful and controlled, but I would say that if this is the movie that he used to get a sense of the sword fighting, I wouldn't expect to see a lot of flipping lightsabers around and arcing them behind your head and all that kind of stuff that we saw in the prequels. And then To Catch a Thief, it's a fun movie. It's Alfred Hitchcock, but it's not one of his more suspenseful outings. It's about this guy who it's an American. Cary Grant plays an American because can't really play anything else. But he's American who fought in the French Resistance, and then after that he wanted to live more extravagantly, and so he became a cat burglar and stole all this jewelry, and then he went to jail. And so the movie takes place after he gets out of jail. There's a string of jewel robberies that basically are his MO from when he was robbing rich women in the French Riviera. And so the police think he's the one doing it. And so he enlists the help of this insurance agent to kind of figure out who might be the next targets and to try to catch this copycat thief. But, so for the romantic scale and grandeur, it takes place in France. It certainly looks like it was shot in France for most of it. And so you get, these really nice helicopter shots of, the beautiful French seaside and the beaches and the hills along there. And sometimes you get shots where Cary Grant and Grace Kelly are in the boat, and so the camera's in the boat next to them, but you get to see the ocean or the sea, whatever it is, and towards the end there's some interesting shots when they're kind of crawling around on a rooftop, and the rooftop has these interesting architectural elements to it, and romantic scale in the sense of it's kind of Cary Grant being Cary Grant. And
I'm not doing my thing, darling.
Right, his banter with Grace Kelly and the woman playing Grace Kelly's mother, and this young French woman who he knows. There's a lot of that kind of going on. So it was sort of interesting that he picked this because it certainly didn't. While I was watching it, there was nothing that jumped out at me. It was like, oh, of course this is going to be in Star Wars, but in that sense, if you think back to Episode 2, certainly, Lucas tried to capture something like that, I guess, when he filmed in Italy for Naboo.
That's true.
And so that's not out of the question for Star Wars, or at least it's not completely alien to the Star Wars vocabulary, and alien was not to be a pun there, but
well, it's kind of like
so you could kind of see like, okay, so if he wants these like big sweeping shots and this kind of fireworks going off in the background as Cary Grant and Grace Kelly are like talking inside and getting close to kissing, and like all of that kind of that romance in that sense, and the scale and grandeur in that sense. I can maybe kind of see what he might be going for. I will say, To Catch a Thief too, like Cary Grant is like 3 shades darker than anyone else in that movie. Like he got super tan, and I don't know if it was natural from him like laying out on the beaches and on the French Riviera for a month first, or if he some kind of 1950s tanning bed situation going on. But it was very odd to see. I mean, because he was also like 50 or 51, I think, when he made that movie, and Grace Kelly was young, so maybe that was his way of like, I need to look like I can with Grace Kelly.
I need to up my game, baby.
Yeah,
but yeah.
But so at least when Rian Johnson talks about the sword fighting in the samurai movie and then the romantic scale and grandeur and To Catch a Thief, that's maybe some things to look out for.
Well, it makes me wonder. It's like, obviously, there's, I'm putting my hands together in prayer, which is kind of, I don't need to because I know this isn't going to happen. Obviously, there's not going to be any kind of romance between Luke and Rey. But yeah. There is a kind of idea where it's going to be like, I get the feeling from, the inklings I've seen is that they're going to be partnered up in this. And that, yes, obviously there won't be any kind of romance, but there is a kind of, they have to have a relationship. And they're going to interact. And then you hear about things about when they were filming in Dubrovnik, that there was like a casino and there's a yacht, and it does kind of make me think of like Monte Carlo, and maybe that.
And there were some of those gambling scenes, and they're out on a yacht, they're out on the beach in Monte Carlo. So yeah, I could see that informing.
It would, and I think that would be exciting because that was such a letdown and I've said this before, that, when they did in episode 2, when they did the lower, the mid levels of Coruscant, when, Anakin and Obi-Wan go into that bar hunting for Zam Wesell, and it's just like how, like, the aesthetic of the place, we went from like 1977 having this beautiful, rustic cantina thing to like, now it's kind of this weird neon thing where it like seems like, it's like, I don't know. I have such a problem with that little bar. I mean, it doesn't have a name. There's no bartender. It's just human beings kind of slightly dressed differently. I feel like George really dropped the ball. And so maybe this would be an idea of him being able to kind of, bring back some of the alien exoticism that, that we got to experience in Rogue One. And, maybe maybe they'll do up this quote casino type thing, better, in a way that is more visually satisfying. I also wonder that, Rian Johnson's, I don't know if they're married or dating or whatever. His partner, Karina Longworth, has a really great podcast called You Must Remember This, where she goes and kind of does multi-episode arcs about, Judy Garland or anybody of the great, like the I think he did something about the Red Scare in the 50s or something like, and I wonder, it's kind of like, with Rian Johnson, obviously has been influenced by her journalism or whatever. It's like, it'll be really interesting to see a Star Wars movie made by someone that really has a greater sense of cinema. And like kind of like lots of multi.
Well, and I mean, George Lucas didn't have a bad sense of cinema, but he had like a very specific thing he wanted to do. Right? He was like, I do this thing, and maybe that's informed a little bit by Kurosawa, and it's informed by these World War II movies. But like, I am a documentary filmmaker, and so I'm going to make this like a documentary, which means that kind of omits a lot of other things that could happen, right? You eliminate a lot of possibilities. And that's fine. Like, having your own style is perfectly right. Like, everyone has their own style, but it did sort of limit him in the way, like, where he could put the camera and how he could set up the shot, and like, who cares what the name of the club is? That sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's like, but George has that kind of, I feel like he's the baby boomer of like, there's a lot of youngish, well, not young anymore, but directors of my generation that they're all kind of like, it's like, well, like, what are your favorite movies? Like, well, I like Star Wars, and it's like the realm of what we enjoyed is kind of like much smaller than I get the feel what Rian Johnson has. It's like, George was never particularly good about relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, familial relationships. That was never his forte. So this kind of idea where it's like, I think there's at least 2 stories going on, if not more, in this episode 8. And this is obviously all speculation, but the idea, like the master, the student, to the reluctant master, and the probably maybe the reluctant student, kind of, that's kind of subtlety hopefully will benefit from somebody that maybe has a wider palette than maybe some of other, because I mean, I never heard J.J. Abrams ever wax poetical about, you know, any old films or older directors. I mean, he is, you know, he's of the generation where it's Lucas, Spielberg, De Palma, you know, Scorsese, and, you know, these people that all kind of, you know, they're all very talented and I love their films, but they all have a certain kind of, like, almost now it's become cliche, the kind of stories they tell, and some of their weaknesses as directors. It's like, you know, like when we just keep going to that same sandbox or that same toolbox, I guess is a better metaphor. Like the Scorsese, you know, it's like we end up with a lot of guys like, you know, Kevin Smith, and like they have they only seem to have like one or two cinematic ideas that they just keep repeating for 20 years.
Right.
So I'm kind of, it heartens me, but it also makes me wonder. It's like, you know, this other quote that you said about this dialogue. That now this is obviously a quote from Rian Johnson.
Yeah. So just to what you've been saying. So I didn't realize that Rian Johnson and Karina Longworth were together. So Karina Longworth wrote a book about George Lucas. There's a series called like Masters of Cinema or something like that, put out by some French, you know, publishing house. And she's written a couple. She wrote one on Meryl Streep and she wrote one on Al Pacino too. But she wrote this. It's not very long, but it's, you know, this book about George Lucas and kind of his career. And I don't know that she picked George Lucas because she has a particular affection for it. I think maybe the publishing company was like, hey, we need someone to write a book about George Lucas. Will you do it? And she said yes. But I think it's interesting and it has a slightly different perspective because of that. And it you know, she talks about American Graffiti and the Indiana Jones movies and THX a little bit, you know, first, and then, you know, then by the time she gets to Star Wars, you kind of have all of that as context for how she talks about Star Wars and everything. And there's not a lot of information that's new in there, especially if you're someone like us who, you know, has read, you know, these making of, you know, the Star Wars books or interviews with him or anything else, but just kind of the way she contextualizes it within his larger film career and, you know, background coming up through the UCLA film, or sorry, was it UCLA or USC? Who are the Trojans? That's USC. Sorry, that was a faux pas. The USC film, you know, school and everything. So I recommend checking out that book if people do, by Karina Longworth. And then I also watching To Catch a Thief. I was, like I said, there's that kind of interesting set of scenes at the end on the rooftop, and that's something we haven't ever gotten in Star Wars 2, this kind of rooftop chase. I mean, we got the chase through Coruscant traffic in episode 2, but, you know, the kind of rooftop chase or rooftop you know, meeting or I guess it was sort of a chase in To Catch a Thief, but it was really more like Cary Grant waiting for the other person to show up and then trying to make it over to her to capture her. You know, that's something that's not an uncommon, you know, movie idea, and so it'd be kind of neat to see that in the context of Star Wars. I think that would be kind of a cool thing to do. Anyway, so yes, the next thing, Rian Johnson, he was asked about writing Star Wars dialogue because, you know, with Brick and many of his other movies, you know, the dialogue is a notable thing about it. And so he says, quote, "I found myself constantly wanting to push modern idioms into the dialogue, and sometimes that can work, but you have to be very careful. If you go too far, you can break that Star Wars spell." So modern idioms. So it sounds like we may, you know, the dialogue may be a little more modern. I don't know what that means. I mean, I didn't feel like the episode 7 dialogue was like dated or anything. I mean, I'm not, you know, as long as he's not putting like "you go girl" into, you know, the script or anything, I'm sure it'll be fine. But, you know, I think they've also been kind of, Lucasfilm broadly has been moving in that direction a little bit, right? Where they're actually calling it a bathroom instead of a refresher, or, you know, they're putting in, you know, okay, this thing smelled like cinnamon, instead of like making up some, you know, Cinnarica,
right.
fake alien spice.
And I mean, that's always been the
I mean,
it's been the bane of the expanded universe, all the way to Timothy Zahn's mint cocoa. He did have mint cocoa, which they just called it cocoa. Well, they had some ridiculous explanation of the beans so they didn't have to call them cacao beans or something like that.
Right.
But yeah, I'm sorry.
So what you want? You had something. Well, you felt a certain way about this.
Yeah, I mean, I like what he's saying, because it's especially since he understands this amorphous thing that you can't quite put your finger on, which is the Star Wars spell. And it's like, I don't have a unified theory of what is this and what breaks this spell. But I will say that even George had a problem with breaking the spell. It's the balance between when you're moving the story forward, but you're trying to use your fun idiomatic dialogue that you came up with. And the simplest explanation of what my point is that when Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith explains to Padme that Anakin has kind of gone to the dark side, and he does this move, which I always call I have to cover my face because I'm going to laugh. And it's Ewan McGregor covers his face. He goes, I saw a video of him killing younglings, and it's like he covers his face because on some level it almost looks like he's Ewan McGregor is covering his face, because at this point when they're trying to impress upon the viewer that your hero, the guy that you loved in the first half of the movie, is killing children now, and he deadens it by using the term younglings, which is his made up, stupid young Jedi word. And it completely undercuts the emotion that Anakin has really gone down this unexcusable, forever dark road. And his own need to throw in one of his little fake made up words it totally undercut the emotion of that scene, to this point where every time I see it, I just cringe. And so I'm glad that he seems to have an understanding that it can work both ways. If you throw in too much, stuff that is idiomatic or whatever, or it's just going to you're going to be forever locked to that time. It's like they open it up, and if Harrison Ford or Han Solo, when he cut open the Tauntaun's belly, and then he goes, "Oh, gross," that would have ruined it,
right?
And I feel it goes both ways. So I'm glad that it's a thing that has always bothered me, especially about the prequels, is that George seemed to be like, "Oh, I'm going to create my own idioms," and because people love Star Wars, I'm sure they'll just catch on. But instead, what happens is he ended up with that when the MTV Movie Awards stuff that happened the year 2005 or whatever, there was a joke. Even Jimmy Fallon, he was playing Anakin or whatever, he said killing younglings, and he goes, "Oh yeah, I killed at this Chinese restaurant that has an open mic called Younglings." And it's and I can never see that line without thinking of Jimmy Fallon, you know what I mean? Because George left that dialogue open. He did a really bad job trying to impress this emotion. He basically has an open joke inside of his own movie. I don't know if I'm putting that across right, but it's this thing that's been bugging me for 12 years or whatever. Not constantly, but what I think about
I think there is a way to make the dialogue modern without it being current, right? So as long as you're not using idioms or slang that are specific to a particular decade, right, or a particular year, right? I think that's fine. Right, if Return of the Jedi, which was made in the 80s, if they'd been like, "Ew, Grody Jody," that would have been weird. That wouldn't have worked. I don't even know if they said it in the early 80s. That may have been mid to late 80s.
I don't think I've ever heard the term Grody Jody in my life. But
really,
Yeah.
Maybe that was my
generation. That's like a Virginia thing or something.
Yeah, maybe that was an East Coast thing. Yeah, I don't. But I feel like episode 7. I didn't feel like the language or the dialogue was dated or anything. I mean, yeah, I keep thinking of the scene where, it's after Rey and Finn have left Ku, but before they meet up with Han, right, where they're trying to fix whatever's leaking on the ship, and she's like asking for him to hand her the thing. She's like, no, the one I'm pointing to, no, that one, no, that, like, that's kind of a modern kind of scene. Like, I don't know that, and again, we don't know how much of this is like the fact that the Star Wars movies were written in the 70s and 80s, and how much of it was just George Lucas was not a very good writer. And he was hearkening back to the old serials from the 50s, so it's even that. But I feel like that scene with Rey and Finn, I mean, if George Lucas had written that in the 70s, the idea may have been there, but it would have sounded different, right? Like, it would have been like, if it was Leia and Luke or something, Leia would have just been really sarcastic with him and be like, oh, great, can you, if you can find this thing as well as you find this, then we're in a great shape, whereas, Rey just like, no, not that one. No, the one I'm pointing to, no, and that felt not quite modern, but I mean, it felt like a somewhat updated version of dialogue we might have heard if Lucas had written it in the 70s. But again, like, I didn't think it was dated. And so, yeah, the fact that he says modern idioms, I'm like, okay, what idioms is he talking about? Right. Like, his idiom also is like a particular part of speech, but it's like raining cats and dogs is an idiom,
right?
And so, I mean, I guess maybe what he's saying is like, oh, for the original trilogy, like, oh, he's strong enough to pull the ears off a Gundark, right? That's an idiom, but that's like within the universe. So I don't know if Rian Johnson's saying like maybe he didn't mean modern, but he meant like in Earth culture, like today's culture, like not idioms that are outside of the Star Wars, kind of contained galaxy and are more like what we use every day.
Right.
And in that case, I'm like, yeah, that makes me a little more nervous. But
well, I mean, even in
modern, that's fine.
I mean, Han Solo says that line when he goes out to find Luke in Empire, and he says, says something like, "Your tauntaun will freeze before you hit the first marker," and then he goes, "Oh, and I'll see you in hell." And it's like, yeah, it's a very like when I was a kid, I was like, "Oh boy, it's amping up the energy." But of course, as time goes on, like Star Wars nerds start to get a little bit like kind of like, I don't like that line because it implies this kind of like, earth-based, belief system of hell and stuff like that when people overthink it. So, I mean, it's a kind of that balance. I feel like, you could get away with that kind of idiomatic stuff. But yeah, I just, when it gets into a certain realm and, with A New Hope, most of that kind of fun banter stuff was kind of added later by, Gloria Katz and Willard Hayek, who had done a pass on some of the humor because even George realized he'd had an issue with his initial run at Star Wars. The script, it lacked a lot of humor, which obviously kind of, I think the problem he made is when he made the prequels, he thought, oh, I figured out, obviously when I first made Star Wars,
I don't have any more friends who will help me write this.
Or he thought, he's like, well, I don't need to pay somebody to do that. I figured out what they did. I'll just do more of that. Where it's like, I'll put in
I don't have time to do that. I'll just write it. I'll just write the movie as we go.
Exactly.
Is basically what he did.
It's like, screw it. We'll do it live. But yeah, I know I saw, you're talking about Karina Longworth's George Lucas book, which I haven't read, but I see there's another George Lucas biography out there, and I picked it up and I was like, oh, maybe I should get this. And I'm like, I don't know if I can hear his boring stories about being in Modesto anymore. How many times I've read those stories. I don't even remember the name of the book, but anyway. But yeah, I think, with the dialogue, I think as long as it's not overly mannered, kind of like, like Brick type stuff, I think we'll be fine. And
yeah.
So what do we got next? What do you want to cover?
Well, so I guess just staying on The Last Jedi real quick. I mean, there are going to be several movies for which we'll see trailers during the Super Bowl, because that's coming up. Right. And of course, ads during the Super Bowl are a thing. They're kind of their own thing now. And so several movies, are advertised like, oh, you'll get to see a trailer for Life. Or not the Martin Lawrence Eddie Murphy movie Life. There's some new movie called Life, which honestly I saw the trailer for and I was like, oh, is this like Prometheus 2? But it's not. And there are a few others. I think the Ghost in the Shell movie with Scarlett Johansson is getting a trailer. But even before that was announced, some folks were speculating whether we would see an episode 8 teaser, I guess, and we got a question on this from Twitter from our pal Andrew, I believe, asking us if we thought we would see a trailer or a teaser for The Last Jedi during the Super Bowl. So what do you think we're going to do that?
I talked to, I initially kind of thought so, but I had a conversation with some people last night of all times about Star Wars, and the consensus with them was like, why would Lucasfilm pay that kind of money for a Star Wars movie to have it when we know that that's everyone. When one of these teasers come out, everybody is around their computers waiting for it to drop, waiting like, is it when they say it's coming out on Thursday, do they mean Thursday at midnight or Thursday at 8 a.m.? And I mean, I've done it myself. Why would you pay that? I don't know, what is it, $20-30 million or something? I mean, I don't even know how much an ad in the Super Bowl costs.
I mean, they definitely hike the prices for ads during the Super Bowl. And that was my initial thought too, is why would they pay the money? And I still don't think that we'll see them, but my reasoning has changed a little bit. I don't know that if it's so much about the money, but I mean, they want the focus to be on Star Wars, right? For Rogue One and for Episode 7, and whenever we got teasers and trailers, like there was an announcement that, okay, you are going to get a Star Wars trailer next week or tomorrow, and it wasn't competing with anything else. It wasn't competing with the Ghost in the Shell movie and Life and the Transformers movie and whatever else, right? The focus was on Star Wars, and that's not to say that I don't think it's not like I think the Star Wars trailer would like pale in comparison to the Transformers trailer. But it's just, they want people to be talking about Star Wars full stop rather than just Star Wars as one of several trailers that they saw. Right. And so I think, and also it's also probably a little early for a trailer. I mean, if the movie's not coming out for 10 more months, they're probably still working on effects. Or in fact, I'm sure that they're still working on effects, and I think they're even still editing the movie. So, I mean, they may have some early scenes that, they could give as a teaser. Certainly I think, if they were going to have a teaser this early, they could just show some images that don't really give away anything. Sort of like what they did with Episode 7, where they had Mark Hamill kind of re-record some dialogue, right? About, the Force is strong in my family. I have it. My sister has it. Or I have that power. My father had it. I have it. You have that power too, right? And then this swell of music, and there wasn't even really anything that gave away the movie. It was just that dialogue was what got people. And with Episode 8 and being The Last Jedi, I think you could have him probably re-record the dialogue from Return of the Jedi, right, where he says, "I'm a Jedi like my father before me," right, but he's the last Jedi. So I think there are ways they could do it this early, but I think if they're going to do it, they're going to make sure that everyone is just paying attention to Star Wars, right? And so they'll put it on ABC, the morning show, or they'll make sure that it gets hyped up so that they're not competing with the Super Bowl and they're not competing with all of these other movies, that they're just going to have people talk about the Star Wars trailer and have everyone talking about that and only that. I mean, within reason, right? Because people are going to talk about other things anyway, but that's where they want the focus to be. And so I'm skeptical that we'll get one, but we may not be that far away from seeing one.
Yeah, because when you were talking, I kind of did a little bit of research, and basically the first footage, the first teaser that we had, the Finn head popping up, the Kylo Ren extending the sabers, Rey on the speeder, BB-8, and then the one spin of the ship, and then boom. What is that? Yeah. 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Anyway, that came out in November 28th of 2014. A good, 13 months approximately 13 months before the release of the film.
Right.
We are now, we're 10 months away now. So yeah, they're already kind of 2 months behind. So I can kind of understand that people are like chomping at the bit, like, this thing's coming out this year. How come we haven't had a teaser? I just feel like you said, it's like a lot of, they don't want to compete with 3 other movies, Papa John's new dipping sauce.
Right.
And, potential, some other ad that comes out, because there's always like some Super Bowl ad that, like, because they spend so much money on it, that like kind of steals the show. Like, oh well, we were all excited about Star Wars, but then we had this ad coming out with babies drinking lattes, and it completely
they don't want to be
on fire.
Yeah, they don't want to be on a list of like the 10 best ads from the Super Bowl and be like number 7.
Right. And and Celebration is
want to be number 1.
Yeah, Celebration is coming up in early April. They've got, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I mean, I can tie this in, is that the rumors are, I've heard, mixed things, that Rogue One's Blu-ray DVD combo pack is coming out either the last week of March or the first week of April. I've heard varying degrees. And so they probably want to time that just right. I mean, it used to be like a thing where like you buy the thing and it unlocks the trailer. I mean, you can't really do that now, but
I wouldn't be surprised if they put the first teaser or the first trailer or whatever was on that DVD, and then just, release it a week ahead of time, the trailer.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing they've been slowly doing now that things are moving into the digital realm. It's like, and I'd said this, before, I was kind of hoping that I would, because basically I only ever I have the Blu-ray of The Force Awakens, but I haven't had it in my player for like a year, because almost a year, because it's like I just use the digital copy. And what they do is they slowly, here and there, you'll boot it up and they'll be like, oh, there's a new extra. There was a Rogue One sneak peek on A New Hope on my iTunes, A New Hope. They just add these things and they don't really even tell you they're coming. And the same thing with The Force Awakens. They added some, a costume design featurette. So yeah, it's that kind of thing where it's like, they should reward people that have bought the digital copies first, and then 12 hours later release it to YouTube or whatever. I mean, everything happens, it seems, simultaneously now. I guess they don't want to have, what do they call that, burden for entry or whatever. They don't want to make people have to
barrier to entry.
Thank you. Barrier to entry of like, well, you had to have dropped $20 to see this, because there's like, I think they're at the point where they realize that every time they release a Star Wars movie, it could be of a potential viewer's first Star Wars film. That kind of that kind of idea is like, they're trying to maintain and build the fan base. So it's. Yeah, I mean, long story short, no, I don't think we're going to see anything during the Super Bowl, but I wouldn't be like shocked if they did like a teaser of, hey, we're going to tease that this is coming out next month or something, like we're going to show you the trailer next month. That might happen, but no clips, nothing. I would not see anything more than maybe a sound effect title. But again, we're so close. I didn't even realize the Super Bowl was this weekend.
Yeah.
I think it's way too soon. I haven't heard. I think by this time you'd already have heard, you know, some inklings that this would be happening, because I still feel like, you know, movie companies still try to tease it a couple days ahead of time to get the frenzy built up.
Well, and with Disney, right? They've been all about, make sure you watch Good Morning America or the Today Show or whatever it is, or make sure you watch The Wonderful World of Disney this week. You know, they'll do it. They'll give people enough lead time so that they're watching some Disney property.
Yeah, and Rebels,
and then, you know, waiting for the thing to show up at the end.
Yeah, Rebels is on a break kind of for the next couple weeks, so they're not. Yeah. There's no new episodes, so there's no opportunity to tease it during a Rebels episode. So yeah, I don't think the stars are really aligned for this right now, and so it's like, you know, they know it's coming out in 10 months. They're behind the times, so to speak. But then again, you know, now that I'm thinking about it, Rogue One, their first teaser was in late March.
Yeah.
So it's, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of how early they started up, you know, Episode 7 is going to end up being an exception, because that was the first Star Wars movie in decades, and they wanted to, you know, people knew it was coming. They wanted to, you know, sort of satisfy that and get that steamroll, get that steam engine running, and, you know, so that it was ready to go, you know, all the hype and all the excitement for it. That people were talking about for a while now, right? Again, we have a Star Wars movie every year. People are talking about Star Wars all the time, or, you know, there's lots of Star Wars stuff to talk about. It's not like they need to like kind of restart the engine for getting people to talk about Star Wars again. So yeah, I mean, I don't think we'll see another teaser 13 months ahead of a movie again. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah. So you mentioned the Rogue One DVD Blu-ray may be released in late March. Also coming up, I don't know when, but it's coming up, related to Rogue One, the Academy Awards, the Hollywood Awards.
The Hollywood Film Awards.
Yeah. So Rogue One was nominated for 2 Academy Awards, one in visual effects, as you would imagine, one for sound mixing, and I would bet with sound mixing that is related to, you know, taking the outtakes from Episode 4 and blending them, and, you know, the voice, you know, blending the voices for Tarkin and Leia and all of that stuff. And that was also part of the visual effects nomination. But that's it. And while I don't know that I ever expected Gareth Edwards to like get nominated for directing or for the script to get nominated, I was a little surprised that they weren't nominated for costumes, just because I thought the costumes were really fantastic in Rogue One, and so I was a little surprised about that. Those movies that were nominated for costumes, because I looked this up: La La Land, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, Florence Foster Jenkins, Jackie, and Allied. So you have 3 period movie. Wait, is La La Land a period movie, or is that supposed to?
No, I think it might be set in contemporary times.
Right. So Florence Foster Jenkins, Jackie, and Allied are all period movies. I had never heard of Allied before I looked this up. Apparently, it's some like World War II kind of Casablanca riff starring George Clooney that came out at some point. I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
And then La La Land, and then I hear, you know, the Harry Potter kind of standalone spin-off movie.
I've been told you don't need to know any Harry Potter to enjoy that. But
yeah, that's fine.
I haven't.
But
seen
that's the only one. I mean, you know,
and that's a period piece because I think it's set during the 20s or something like that.
Right. Like, great. They somehow found a suit that fit George Clooney well. They somehow found a dress that fit Natalie Portman well. Like, is that really the best? Yeah. Is that really the best costume? And I shouldn't disparage the work that the fine people did in making the costume for those movies, whatever. But like, I don't know. I feel like if you're just making, we need people to wear suits and wear dresses like they did in the 60s or the 40s. It's like, all right, there's probably a little bit less work going into that than like, all right, design costumes for entire like Jeddah city, right? This kind of mecca city where you have people and aliens and creatures from all over the galaxy, from all of these different societies and religious backgrounds, and you have to kind of immediately get a sense from their costume of who they are and why they're there, right? Like, and I thought they did a really good job. I mean, of that scene in particular, and you know, maybe Star Wars gets points taken off because people think like, oh, well, you're just updating what people did 40 years ago. And we can talk about whether that's fair or not. And to a certain extent, right? Like, okay, you design new stormtrooper uniforms, like that's great, but it's maybe not, you're not starting from scratch there. But at the same time, I mean, I feel like there was enough other kind of original material, original costume work done in that movie that was really good that I was a little surprised that it didn't.
I mean, none of the other
who cares about award nominations? I don't pay that much attention, but it was just one of those things I saw and went, oh, huh. And then I saw who was nominated and I was like, really?
Yeah, it's not like
great. You found a suit to fit Ryan Gosling.
Exactly. It's not like they invented pants. Right. You know what I mean? Like, so you can't, that argument that they would say like, well, these are pre-existing designs that are being modified. It's like, okay, so like La La Land, like nobody wore a blue suit, you know, before Ryan Gosling, which I think he wears a blue suit. I haven't seen it, but you know what it is.
Right. Like, you found a shirt and tie that looked good on Ryan Gosling. Here's your nomination.
The Academy has a thing about zippers. They don't like zipper costumes.
Could be.
They're like, Star Wars movies, Star Wars costumes don't have zippers. Mm-hmm. I'm not giving them Oscar Gold for that. But yeah, it's kind of like, everything you said, I agree with. It's just like you built this world. It's something that you have a few seconds to kind of, you know, establish these things. And I feel like they did it marvelously. And for them not to be, you know, recognized. I mean, even some of the makeup stuff, it's like, you know, being able to, you know, some of these aliens, obviously they're silicone appliances. It's not all CGI. And I mean, and like, even like I said, back to the costumes, having, you know, like a lot of great fun stuff that kind of expands the kind of like, almost is able to bridge the comic book, the EU, that kind of stuff that we always thought that our heroes wore, and they kind of get to wear it. I mean, the costuming in a lot of the other Star Wars movies are very simplistic, and, you know, to be perfectly honest, in like the prequel eras, especially when it came to the Jedi, it just, all their clothing felt really impractical. Like, it never felt like it, like when they were, you know, when they were running and Jedis are running, it's like, yeah, you're running with about 15 pounds of burlap on you. And it doesn't actually seem like functional. And I think everything about, you know, Rogue One is that people's costumes, you know, what's his face? Saw Gerrera's, you know, apparatuses and stuff, you know, notwithstanding, yes, there's a lot of flourish and stuff, but I enjoyed it. And, you know, kind of making, there's also something to be said about the idea of, like, say, Krennic's outfit. And, you know, Krennic isn't wearing anything terribly different than any of the other boring guys sitting at that Imperial Death Star table, but then they took it. They added the flourish, the high collar, and the scarf. The sometimes that he wears, like kind of like the mini cape. That's kind of like a combination rain poncho. I mean, it's like this functionality that is kind of like, I don't know. It should be celebrated. It's not, you know, but like you said, awards. You know, I learned when I was a kid, you know, when Annie Hall beat out Star Wars for Best Picture of 1977. It's like I kind of knew it was like, oh, this isn't, you know, the Oscars are about, you know, well, most times. I mean, they did give Best Picture to Return of the King, which I'm still shocked that they did. not that I dislike Return of the King. It's just it was such a thing where like Hollywood rarely actually you know, gives big awards to genre entertainment. And I mean, I will say that, I will concede that there was probably there was nothing that in the performances that I would have considered Oscar worthy, but that's not a dig on anybody. It's like, Oscar worthy performances are, there's two kinds. There's the ones where the actors, tend to distinguish themselves in a piece that might not necessarily be a distinguished acting piece. I'm trying to think of, I don't want to go and have to use my brain to think back at one of those. But then there's like these, like most people that get nominated for Best Actor, it's like the most interesting thing in the movie was their performance.
Right.
I mean, that's like with Meryl Streep. Meryl Streep hasn't been in a movie where she was just one part of a big machine in decades. It's like when you go and see a Meryl Streep.
Someone hasn't seen Mamma Mia.
Oh, I have.
I'm joking.
I have not. Joking. But you know what I mean? She's like, she's very famously playing Forrest. Was it Forrest Foster Jenkins? I haven't seen that. But I saw her when she played.
Right, she plays the title character.
She plays the title character, and then the whole thing is the fact it's her performance. It's usually the only, like when she played Julia Child, her being Julia Child is literally the only interesting thing in that movie. The rest of it's garbage. It's like when Amy Adams shows up, you're like, oh, you're in this still? That's what the Oscars like right now. And there really wasn't anything like that. There hasn't been anything like that in a Star Wars movie. Except for maybe Ian McDiarmid. I honestly feel like maybe he could have got a Best Supporting nod for Revenge of the Sith. Because he was kind of like, maybe he was chewing the scenery too much, but he was making mountains out of molehills, so to speak, of, really making Palpatine, a great villain. But maybe that's not Oscar-worthy stuff, but who cares?
Yeah.
So what's next? What's the next?
Well, so let's move. So we've covered The Last Jedi. We've covered Rogue One. Let's move on to the Han Solo movie, Star Wars Red Cup.
Red Cup. What is that?
I actually saw one or two places report that was like the working title of the movie or something. I'm like, oh, you idiot! Like you clearly do not understand that reference or something.
Well, I understand what the Red Cup is, but is there an extra layer of Star Wars lore to that?
No, it's just right because those Red Cups are made by the Solo company.
Oh, Jesus.
And this is the Han Solo movie.
I'll be honest with you. I didn't get that until just now. I'm an idiot. Oh,
okay.
God.
But God. Right, but like, that's not, even if that wasn't the reference, they're not going to call a movie Star Wars Red Cup. Like that, they're not going to call a Star Wars movie Red Cup. That doesn't make any sense. So no, that is not the working title to the movie.
I overthought it. I thought that Red Cup was kind of like a joke because it was like, it's like Han Solo, the college years, because he's got the Red Cup, and be like, oh man, I didn't even get that. I'm de-witting as I get older. I should have gotten that. Ugh.
So anyway, so the movie has started filming. Chris Miller, the co-director, posted a photo of a clapboard on Twitter with the caption "Han first shot." Which again, if you
I do get that
reference.
I do get that one.
All right. I don't know how far we have to go back for this. So I think principal photography or the main shooting, I don't think is going to start until March. So this might just be some early stuff that they're getting. For episode 8, they came in and shot some early stuff on Skellig Michael while they still had the permit or whatever. And then like the main shooting schedule started a couple months later. So I don't know what it is that they're filming now, but production has officially started, I guess. And then someone talked to Donald Glover because he's promoting various things these days. He says he still has not seen the script due to secrecy, confidentiality concerns. So that applies there. They're starting production soon. There's a script out there, but if they're not filming until March, then Donald Glover may not get his until a week or two before he starts shooting. And the fact that he hasn't gotten it yet, either they're shooting the Lando scenes later, or how big of a role does he have really if he doesn't get to be kind of in the loop about some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And then finally, someone posted a photo of Alden Ehrenreich in the Han Solo, shirt and vest and gun thing, and it's like, oh, yeah, this is really going to happen, isn't it? This isn't just like a thing we're going to talk about forever. Like, we're actually going to see this happen, and that was a little weird.
But that's a Photoshop, right?
It might be, but even so, just like the idea of like, oh yeah, we're gonna see someone else as Han Solo. Like, yeah, okay,
I see what you mean. Yeah, I know and I think that's the kind of the hardest thing to bear. And again, repeating myself. It's gotta, I wish them well on Twitter, which I'm sure they were waiting for my take on it, but I honestly do. I wish them well on this because, everyone I've ever talked to, it's like the way to break it down is it's the Star Wars movie that nobody asked for, and they have so much. I feel like they have so much going against them in as far as nerd outrage and getting it wrong and all these young guys playing these iconic roles of actors that are still alive, and it's like, it's just kind of like, man, I don't want to say hubris because it does. I haven't heard anything come out of them going like, oh yeah, this is going to be the easiest thing. It's this is going to be a cakewalk, but
right.
Maybe so we technically have two directors because they direct on a team. I don't know how that works. If one does second unit and one does this or that, or they just kind of work on it together.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how the Coen brothers do it because technically one of the Coen brothers is the director and one's the producer, but I think the one who's a producer also directs a little bit.
Yeah.
And I know on Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which had two directors, right? Basically, they alternated days. So like one of them would be shooting one day and then the next day, Terry Jones would be looking over the dailies of the footage he shot the previous day while Terry Gilliam was shooting his footage.
And then they would argue about it.
Right. And so that was a case where maybe they had two different sensibilities and they weren't totally on the same page. And so it didn't really work for them. But, with Miller and Lord, they've done it enough that maybe they have an easier time,
right,
working that way, or who knows how they do it? Because I can't imagine they have like both of them there at the same time. Telling,
who knows? I
directing the actors, in tandem.
I tried to watch one of those, like the Wachowskis. They work as a team, and it's like I watched those Matrix DVDs to kind of get a feel for it, but it's like, you can't really even from that get a feel of how they divided up the role when they were making a movie. There's so many things to be done. So the fact that there's two directors is probably a good thing. They have twice as much brain power to, and what is this, their fifth film they've done together or
yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So it's,
but yeah, I do get the sense that, you have Rian Johnson working on episode 8 and post-production, and we've kind of got a sense of how that's gone, and we know how Rogue One went and all that. With the Han Solo movie and Miller and Lord, I feel like we do get the sense it's like, oh, those crazy guys over there, they're doing something weird and wacky and they're having fun, and who knows what they're going to come up with. And like it just has this different, the way people talk about it and the way they've like interacted, talked about it in interviews and what we've heard about it. It has like a very different vibe.
Yeah.
To me, not necessarily the movie itself, but like the process by which they're making it. So.
Yeah, and then going back to like we were talking costumes. It's like, do you really think that he's gonna be, in full Han Solo, striped blue pants with, they talk about the Corellian blood stripe, but apparently that's they've been kind of softening that's what, that there's any kind of special
backstory to the pants.
His pants, it's like, because if you can point out like, there's like 5 people in A New Hope wearing those exact same pants. They just have, but it's, do you think that that's like him, kind of the revelation of him getting that costume is either going to be a plot point, or you think he's just going to be like, they're going to want to make him look as much like the Han Solo we know, because it's like, well, we don't even know what his hair is going to look like. I mean, those shots, he's got, obviously Alden Ehrenreich's got much wavier hair, but
yeah,
that doesn't
I mean,
matter.
I don't know. I feel like it might go back to our Uncanny Valley discussion that we had, where it's like if they put him in some of the exact same costumes, then they kind of invite the comparison, and people go like, yeah, he kind of doesn't really look like Han Solo, or like, yeah, it looks weird to see someone else in that vest, but at the same time, they need, some kind of signifier that that's Han Solo. And so, that's, for Star Wars fans, at least, that's kind of the recognizable look to the character. And so I would imagine the designers and costume folks they have working on that movie are coming up with ways to give him wardrobe that are reminiscent of, the way he looked in A New Hope, but, make it a little younger looking, right? Because A New Hope, he's a certain age, and I guess it depends on how far in advance of A New Hope this movie takes place, right? Is this immediately before? Is this a couple of years before? Is this like 5-10 years before? It depends on, I guess, how much I guess it couldn't be 10 years before, because that's too big of an age difference. But, they can either make it look really close, or they can say, well, it's someone who slightly younger Han Solo. What would his kind of personal style be, and what would he be wearing, and make it reminiscent of how he looks in A New Hope, but just kind of make it look a little more youthful. I feel like that's probably, if I had to guess, that's probably where the costume design folks are going in.
Yeah, and that there is a precedence for that. I mean, the evolution of Anakin Skywalker's costume in, Attack of the Clones versus Revenge of the Sith, it started becoming more of kind of a weird riff on the Darth Vader thing with the short. I don't even know what the terminology is, but the black and the browns and the overlay that's very similar to his armor, the cloth that he has underneath his whatever chest piece or whatnot. As far as you were talking about age, Alden Ehrenreich, he's like 27. And for some reason, I make this mistake every time they cast somebody. It's like, oh, they're going to play their age. It's like, well, Harrison Ford.
Right.
Harrison Ford was, 34, 35 when he made Star Wars. And it's like, but, I made this mistake before with Rogue One, that I assumed that because Felicity Jones is like 33, that like Jyn is like 33, but she's more like 21 or something like that in this.
Yeah, she's like 22-ish. Yeah.
So we might be getting a Han Solo who's, hovering around 19 or 20 in this movie, which it would give enough of a gap around there to kind of, maybe assuage some of the anxiety that, like, well, what is he going to be like, Han Solo 10 minutes before A New Hope or whatever. It's so they can kind of do that. And, Donald Glover, he's in his early 30s, but then it's again, and he's kind of a young looking guy. I mean, I honestly, if somebody asked me how old he was before I looked it up, I'd say he's probably 25. So they're going to probably be, through not letting them have, close shave or whatever. It's like they can kind of de-age him a little. Every shot I see, I'm looking at this, every shot of Alden Ehrenreich, he's got like at least 2 or 3 days growth on his face. But you take that away, and, put him in a kind of a different costume, and then they can kind of build on it, that kind of thing. Like, yeah, Mike, he's picking up pieces as it goes on. It's like, oh, he gets the white shirt, or he gets the pants, or he gets the, the gloves or the jacket, it's like if this is how he gets the Millennium Falcon, then like he's just going to open up a closet and there's going to be clothes in there, and he's like, I'm going to put this on, I don't, which might actually kind of go back into the idea that, kind of a funny riff back to Empire, when all of a sudden, like, Lando at the end is wearing one of Han's extra outfits, and he's like, well, they were actually Lando's first, and he bought a box of these outfits, and they just sit in the back or something like that, the vest and the white shirt. But yeah, it's, it can.
The other thing I just thought of is that, we've already seen a younger Lando on Rebels, and so I wonder to what extent they're going to take those designs into account. Whether the Rebels folks, it turns out that they'll have basically contributed to the costume designs on this movie based on kind of where Lando was several years before we see him in Empire Strikes Back.
Oh yeah, should look at
so that could be interesting to watch too, and because I would imagine Lucasfilm would want to keep some continuity and style there. And he has the mustache, so he'll probably have the mustache. But I don't think he has a cape on any of the Rebels episodes he's shown up on so far. Yeah, I'm looking.
The only thing he has that kind of has his unique flair.
He just has like weird pants.
He has a medallion, I guess he wears at some point.
Yeah,
and it's like, I don't know if they'll do that, but yeah, it's kind of, it'll be interesting. I'm trying to look at real quick at these shots, but he kind of has very functional kind of, Rebels-esque type clothing. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, but yeah, it would be a nice opportunity to kind of give him something with, some panache and some flair, which, to be perfectly honest, there's that old cliche we talk about Lando. Oh, he's so smooth and all this stuff, and which I always feel has a lot more with people's, affection for Billy D. Williams than really an explanation of the character. But it's like, yeah, we saw him in that really cool costume in Cloud City, but then like he was dressing like crap the rest of the rest of the movies. It's like, he has that horrible outfit he wears, his General Calrissian outfit, which looks like these baggy kind of military uniform. It's like there's not a lot of style in there, it's kind of, so this will give an opportunity to kind of see like where he was before, like his, we only really get to see that window where he has Cloud City for, then everything kind of goes wrong and he's kind of on the run the rest of the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what should we talk about next?
So so speaking of the Han Solo movie,
yes.
We'll jump over to video games briefly. Ooh. So the Amy Hennig helmed game that we've been hearing about and seeing a few glimpses of, there's a rumor going around, and by say rumor going around, like multiple websites have reported this, that the game is being revised a little bit because they were worried that it was going to interfere with the Han Solo movie, and so they're kind of not completely rewriting it because it's a little late in the game to be rewriting it completely, but depending on which site you're looking at, part of the rumor was that it was initially a Han Solo game, and now it's just about an unnamed smuggler. So like the plot is all the same, but they just had to change the character name and some of the character design, I guess, of the main person. Given how long they've known about the Han Solo movie, I'm a little skeptical that they ever had that. Like, oh yeah, we'll make a Han Solo movie and a Han Solo game at the same time, set in the same time period. And, oh yeah, I'm sure everything will be fine. Nothing will go, so I don't know if that's actually what it was. I'm a little skeptical that that's what it was, but it does sound like, at the very least, they're kind of keeping a lot of the game intact as it was, but they're changing maybe some of the characters around, or maybe a little bit of the plot of the game. But I mean, what was your reaction to seeing this?
I was surprised that was what they were going to do, because it's funny because it's almost the exact opposite of what happened with one of what people consider the great lost Star Wars game, which is Star Wars 1313, which was originally supposed to take place all on Coruscant, and there was a very exciting teaser trailer that showed up at E3 about 6-7 years ago now, it feels like, and then of course the game was canceled. And what the rumors were is that basically they were trying to create an in-universe action game that wasn't based on any particular pre-existing protagonist, and then they were gonna throw in all your favorites, bounty hunters and whatnot. And then right before George went and sold Star Wars to Disney, he famously came in and said, I want this to be Boba Fett. I want the main character to be Boba Fett, which basically kind of threw the wrench in the works. and someone had said, like, did you know, like, how much it's going to cost to change the protagonist to Boba Fett? And he was like, I don't care. And it basically, and then he went and sold it.
It's my company. I can do whatever I want.
Exactly.
You're telling me I can't do what I want with.
Exactly. And then the game was canceled. And I think it's funny, though. It's like, Hennig starts out with having the protagonist be a beloved character, and now they're moving it to be just a dumpy, schlubby nobody that like, oh, what is this kind of thing? It's like, I mean, I always feel like, for me personally, for a video game, that's the best way to go. I don't want to have
create new characters.
Yeah, I don't want to have it would have been fantastic to have like, and that would be a fun opportunity to yank somebody out of the EU again, like a Dash Rendar, or, to be honest, the best thing would to be kind of like create your own. Because, I mean, that's what people want in gaming now. They want infinite, customization. They want to be able to, if they go, I want to look like, I want to be a fat guy. I want to be a lady. I want to be, it's like you can do these things now. And it seems odd that in 2017 you'd be like, oh yeah, you can play as Han Solo, because the first thing it's going to say, it's like, a certain portion of the gaming thing was like, oh great, another Star Wars game. And it's like, I like to be able to play as a lady because I'm a lady and I like to play as a lady or whatever. Because, Battlefront was very accommodating for that. Whatever your aesthetic would be, you could change the head of the character without a helmet. You could be, many different skin tones, many different hairstyles, and I don't know. I've been playing, as far as my own gaming right now, I've been playing this game I'm sure you've heard of have you heard of Skyrim?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
It's a huge what do they call it? It's an RPG. It's an open world, and basically from the get go, once you can pick what you want to look like. It's like I'm playing as like a cat. I look like a cat, and I can just. And you can just kind of openly, you can play the main mission, or you can not play the main mission. And I was playing that game as much as I have been. It's like, man, I really hope it's going to be that kind of, like, maybe potentially an open world RPG kind of situation. Because they talk about, having it just be like an unnamed smuggler. It's like, at least there's an implication that this game is going to have some kind of internal economy, which, usually is what necessitates you to, go on missions and stuff like that. Not like Battlefront where it's, action, even though I guess Battlefront 2, which I hopefully is not going to be called Star Wars Battlefront 2. Hope they come up with a better name. They were talking about...
No, I'm pretty sure it's going to be Battlefront 2.
Jeez. Yeah, the pre-orders aren't up yet, but they're, they've learned, supposedly they've learned from their mistakes on that game, and they're going to be doing, it's going to be multi Star Wars eras, and it's going to have a single player, and it's going to have a bit more depth. But, there's been so little information about this Amy Hennig. Like last summer I went and I spent a premium to go sit and watch Amy Hennig maybe drop a rumor. And she was tight-lipped, so I understand she's can't let the cat out of the bag too early. But it makes me wonder. It's like, does this mean the game's going to be put off another year or something because they have to? Yeah, it's like that can be a big.
I mean, it sounded like they were, these rumors were quick to say, like, don't worry, they're not redoing everything, right? They're not going to. So hopefully, it's like, don't worry, it's not going to be delayed too much. I mean, one reason I'm skeptical that this was a Han Solo game is because Hennig has, in interviews and things, she's talked about how, it's like Uncharted, but it's like an ensemble thing, right? You have multiple characters that you have to kind of go back and forth between. And so how do you manage that rather than just have, one main character who drives everything? And so I feel like if they were going to do that, then it doesn't make sense for it to be a Han Solo game as much. If it's going to be, if Han Solo is just going to be kind of one of a couple different characters doing something, I feel like, well, if it's going to be a Han Solo game, you need to have Han Solo be the guy in it, or, the character in it. So yeah, I mean, I'm still skeptical that that's what it was. Now, it could be that it took place during the same time period, or it took place on one of the same planets or something as the Han Solo movie. But again, given how far in advance these things have been known, and maybe this is like an old rumor or something that happened a while ago and it's just now coming to light. I mean, who knows? But it didn't seem that way. It seemed like this was a pretty recent thing. I mean, if if they've been making this game for a while, and if they've been writing the movie for a while, like, they probably would have, if it was something as big as, oh, they were making a Han Solo game and now the movie contradicts it, like, they probably would have caught that a while ago, and kind of nipped that in the bud sooner. Or the other way to look at it is like, all right, so maybe, this is kind of the hierarchy of things, right? Lucasfilm says like, oh, we're open to like creatives and people who want to tell stories, but at the end of the day, the movies are going to take precedence over the other stuff. And so, if there's a video game or a book or a comic book that, is in development at the same time as the movie, they don't necessarily get to call like first dibs on,
right.
Oh, but we had Han Solo doing this, right? They're going to go with the movie, which, makes sense. Not necessarily because movies are more important than these other things. I think for Star Wars, they probably are, but just what it takes to get a movie made and what it takes to get a script signed off on for a movie is a different process than it is for, a video game or a comic book or anything else. And so it may be harder to change down the line with a movie. So yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm skeptical that they're changing this game because it was a Han Solo game, but it does sound like, yeah, I mean, it sounds like either someone dropped the ball or they're still working out this process of like how they have multiple things in development at one time without just telling people to kind of do what they want and reconcile it later. How to have that kind of centralized oversight over the storytelling while having, juggling multiple balls in the air at once.
Yeah. And it's, and like back to what you were saying about like, movies versus, video games in contradicting, it makes me wonder if, maybe there's been some changes in the scripting of the movie that kind of like, because now that thanks that obviously Rogue One benefited greatly from, we won't say 11th hour, but like, let's say 10th hour reshoots and tinkering and stuff. So maybe Lucasfilm is less scared of like, hey, if we have a problem and we truly feel like we need to fix something, like, let's just do it. Let's not hem and haw and go like, well, we already spent the money. We already filmed we already contracted the actor. We've already, we already have the game coming. It's like, no, we can just tell them like, hey, let's just juggle this and take Han Solo out of the game because we're changing the orientation of this story. Because, when we finally got down to in production or pre-production, we realized that some of this stuff is just not, we don't need to do it. It's the kind of, I think they're, in some ways, Disney is kind of, now that it's funny, now that they're 2, 3, 4 films into it, they're like, oh, we're learning how to do this, that kind of, I mean, Kathy Kennedy, I mean, she was never involved in a Star Wars film before this, even though she was involved in some of the, biggest films of all time. She was never involved in a Star Wars film, so she had to learn too. So, it's just, I think that's one of those things where Disney is learning that they have the power. They can go in and change something midstream and still have it be successful. So maybe they're going to be less afraid of if they feel like something is more of an unknown quantity, they might want to just run right in and just say like, let's not even futz around with it. Let's just change it right now. Which obviously down the chain of ephemera or ancillary material, it all gets changed. It's kind of like, remember there was a prequel Rogue One comic that was supposed to come out that got canceled all of a sudden. I forget what they even said. Did they even give a synopsis for that?
I don't think so. I don't think it even made it that far.
And of course,
or it did, but we haven't heard about it.
A mid-production video game is actually some video games have larger budgets than films. Probably not Star Wars films, but a Rockstar Grand Theft Auto game has a $250-300 million budget when they're made. They're every bit as big as a movie. So yeah, it is kind of when you do that, you're putting a monkey wrench into a very big process. So it's not like search and replace Han from like find Han, replace with man, and just click and search and replace. But yeah, I'm still excited. I mean, Uncharted, I like that series. I haven't played the last one, which Amy Hennig left, I think, in pre-production on. So I don't know if it would necessarily be much of a clue as to where she's at in her mind on games right now. But like I said, she didn't talk about it when I watched her interview, but just hearing how she approaches games and the mentality behind it, it's like I really think it's going to be a winner. Although I still have a spot in my heart hoping that they will come out with something that's kind of like the KOTOR open world RPG kind of stuff, because we're getting to be like so long. I think KOTOR came out like 15 years ago or something like, and it's like it's been so long. And for like, to me, it's just as simple as like, let's create a Star Wars game where you can buy a ship and you can fly to different planets and you can do things, and it's all in the game. It's like, and I'm just shocked that they have not. There must be some reasoning behind it why they haven't done this yet, because we're getting in. We're a couple years into this current generation of consoles, and they've already, we're already at the point where they've released the second versions of all the consoles. And we have literally one Star Wars game to play. And to be perfectly honest, even after spending way too much money on DLC and stuff, it's like I feel like I really didn't get anything close to my money's worth on that game. I played the levels, the Scarif levels, which I don't know. Did I talk about this? The idea that the way that the Scarif game levels of Battlefront kind of give you a feel for that, maybe of how the original ending for Rogue One was gonna kind of go. No, just the idea that the whole point is it's like a capture the flag type thing where you go to one thing, you literally grab data tapes, and then you run to your ship to escape. Now, this game takes place pretty far away from the spire as it's depicted in the film, but it made me think that, like, yeah, this is kind of their take of kind of the original way that Rogue One had that they actually had physical cassette tapes and they actually had to get on a ship and leave. But I could just be reading too much into that. I mean, you can also play the game and have Lando show up and help you out. So I don't think that could be a canon. So that's just me speculating.
Yeah. Well, so I guess, we'll be interested to see what happens with that, whether we get that game and when we get it and what it looks like. So then now let's move to books. We got book news. So yesterday, I think it was, not to put a timestamp on this show, but recently we got the official synopsis for the third and final book in the Aftermath trilogy, Empire's End. This was on the IO9 blog on Gizmodo. We got the synopsis for the book, and then we got an excerpt from the book. And so I will read the synopsis real quick. Every end is a new beginning. As the final showdown between the New Republic and the Empire draws near, all eyes turn to a once isolated planet, Jakku. I guess I should say, if you have not read mostly the second book, this might have some minor spoilers in it. But so anyway, the Battle of Endor shattered the Empire, scattering its remaining forces across the galaxy. But the months following the rebellion's victory have not been easy. The fledgling New Republic has suffered a devastating attack from the Imperial remnant, forcing the new democracy to escalate their hunt for the hidden enemy. For her role in the deadly ambush, Grand Admiral Ray Sloan is the most wanted Imperial war criminal. and one-time Rebel pilot Nora Wexley, back in service at Leia's urgent request, is leading the hunt. But more than just loyalty to the New Republic drives Nora forward. Her husband was turned into a murderous pawn in Sloane's assassination plot, and now she wants vengeance as much as justice. But Sloane, too, is on a furious quest, pursuing the treacherous Gallius Rax to the barren planet Jakku. As the true mastermind behind the Empire's devastating attack, Rax has led the Empire to its defining moment. The cunning strategist has gathered the powerful remnants of the Empire's war machine, preparing to execute the late Emperor Palpatine's final plan. As the Imperial fleet orbits Jakku, an armada of Republic fighters closes in to finish what began at Endor. Nora and her crew soar into the heart of an apocalyptic clash that will leave land and sky alike scorched, and the future of the galaxy will finally be decided. So yeah, I mean, sounds very exciting. I had to, when I was reading the synopsis, I had to remind myself of what happened in the second book, because I was like, deadly ambush. I don't remember a deadly ambush in the previous one, and then I was like, oh, that's right, they did a thing. Yeah, so I mean, it sounds good to me, and setting up. I think Barnes and Noble is also doing this thing where if you buy a copy at their stores, it comes with either one or two posters, one of Nora Wexley, one of Ray Sloane. So those are kind of like the two main characters of this book. On opposite ends, kind of fighting each other, but at the same time, they're both kind of really fighting this guy Gallius Rex. So the synopsis certainly captures that. The excerpt is a bit, I don't know if this is part of the main story or if this is one of those interludes that we've been getting, right? So we've been getting the way Chuck Wendig is writing these, we've been getting the main story, this, Nora Wexley and her band of rebels story. And then we've been getting interludes from throughout the galaxy, just giving this kind of impression of where people are, what's happening, with the Empire, the fall of the Empire, and how that's played out. And so the excerpt that's on the IO9 blog is about Lando and Lobot. Lando returning to Cloud City to try to rebuild it. I guess he's been back at Cloud City for a while. There are references to the Iron Blockade and Governor Adelhart from the Star Wars Uprising game. And Leland Chee on Twitter mentioned that this excerpt also sheds a little bit of light on what would have happened at the end of Star Wars Uprising. That game was canceled or just ended. I don't know how you cancel a video game, but basically that video game was moving towards, there's a plot to it. It was part of this canon. It was, there was a story involved with it about, very much what happened with the fall of the Empire. And you had this Governor Adelhart who was basically denying that the Empire died and was using that to try to oppress people in the Know It sector where Bespin is. And so Leland Chee said this excerpt, and maybe if there's more of it in the book, shed some light on what would have happened at the end of Uprising, right? What kind of the end of that Uprising story would have been. So I like that we get Lando, obviously. The Lando and Lobot talk about the fact that he needs to get Han and Leia a baby shower gift, basically, for because Ben is going to be born soon at this point. So I think, did you read the first one?
I did. I read the first one and I skipped the second one, and I'm probably gonna find a way to maybe read the Lando parts of this one without reading the whole book.
Yeah.
Although if you're saying he's shopping for gifts, would it really be worth?
Well, I mean, I think that's just a cover. I don't think the book actually shows him shopping for gifts.
Like,
but he's like, oh, what if I get him a little cape and a mustache?
What if Lobot's like, why don't you get him some implants? I like implants. I have implants. Have you noticed that I have implants?
Yeah.
Like, yes, Lobot.
Well, no, he doesn't like that. He lost his personality, though.
Oh, yeah, he lost his personality.
From the Lando comic, he's
got no personality.
That was his choice to lose his personality to the computer. Yeah, I mean, I'll read it. I'm this excerpt and this synopsis have once again kind of re-stoked my curiosity, not necessarily for reading the book itself, but just finding out what happens, right? I want to find out what happens, and that's probably the best reason to read this book. The excerpt itself seems like it's written pretty well. I had some issues with the first two books, particularly the second one. Not necessarily with Wendig's writing style per se, but just the quality of the writing. So I'll read it. And sort of looking forward to it. It's like, oh, we finally get to find out what happens. Where this Gallius Rax thing. What's the surprise waiting for us on Jakku? Is this book maybe where we find out who Rey's parents are, or are we going to find out what happens to Rey Sloane? Right? Are we going to get a definitive end to her story, or is she going to kind of wander off and maybe she'll crop up again later on? I don't know. So I'll read it, and that comes out in about 3 weeks, a little less than 3 weeks, so not too much longer.
Yeah, and I mean, I should be honest. I mean, I've heard a lot of people actually have enjoyed this series, and personally, it's like, yeah, I said, I didn't really enjoy his writing. I don't enjoy any guy that kind of they use in the marketing thing, like, oh, he wrote it in 40 days, and it's like, well, I've done those NaNoWriMo novels myself, and I would never. Just because
you can write a novel in 40 days doesn't mean you should.
I would never subject anyone to reading it.
Yeah, but also, I mean, I don't know how much of it's the writing and how much of it's just like, maybe this doesn't have the strictest editing in the world. Like, maybe they need to edit this a little more closely and clean up a lot than they have been.
Yeah, and I think that's my one thing. It's like, I feel like in some respects, it's like, I feel like he's fast. Like, a lot of the thing about this series kind of, and again, I never read the second one, so if you're out there going like, you don't know what you're talking about, you're right. But it's like that kind of, it feels like they were just replicating all the worst mistakes that the Star Wars EU novels were doing around the time that Disney, bought Star Wars. So it's kind of like, it became impossible to create any real sense of scale or depth, and it was like, but even the idea that, like, Lando shopping for baby gifts is a plot point and in an excerpt, it's like, come on, really? And then like, oh, don't you want to find out? And they list these 3 characters that I'm like, that didn't impress me, but then again, like I said, I've talked to some other people that really enjoy this series, and that Rey Sloane is kind of like, they're like really into that. They want to know what's going on with her, and Rey Sloane's a her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. Yeah. And it's just like, so yeah, I won't read it, but John probably will, but you're also a faster reader than I am.
I'll read it and tell you whether it's worth your time
exactly.
to read it. How about that? Or to listen to it.
You will tell our listeners.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of things that we're not sure we want to read, the Darth Maul comic miniseries started today. Issue number 1 came out today. I haven't read it yet, and that's part of what I want to talk about. But we've also already seen the cover of issue number 3, which features bounty hunters Cad Bane and Aura Singh. So that was notable, I guess. I mean, how do you feel about this Darth Maul miniseries? Are you excited about it? Are you anxious to read it? Do you not care? Basically, we're going to work out on Mike whether we're going to read this and talk about it, because I'm having a hard time caring about it, because I never really cared about the character that much, and I recognize that many people do, and they're welcome to read it and enjoy it. I'm not going to disabuse them of the notion that they should enjoy it. Like, yeah, if you want to enjoy it, great. But for me personally, I never really cared about Maul as a character. And especially if they're putting like Cad Bane and Aura Singh in this thing, it's like, great, just put all the characters I don't really care about into one comic book, push it over there. I don't have to read it, and they can just all hang out and do stuff over there, and then I'll enjoy these things over here. Like, that's kind of where I am with this.
Yeah, they should call it, Darth Maul Unrecognized Potential, because it does feel like, yeah, it's the repository of underdeveloped characters. I mean, I'm looking at this alternate cover from issue 1, which it's Maul and Cad Bane, and then there's this mosquito looking thing, which I think was actually depicted in in The Force Awakens in Maz Kanata's castle, and then there's a Bothan, I think. There's like a furry Bothan character, which, again, it's another one of these characters that have been kind of tossed to the wayside. They've never been really depicted to any great import.
There's some cool-looking aliens that, we're not just going to put Wookiees all over the place.
I mean, I like the idea of a Darth Maul thing, especially if it's set, obviously, pre Phantom Menace. I think it's been a long time, and I keep bringing it up, and I keep feeling like maybe I'm building it up more than if I actually reread it. But I do remember enjoying Darth Maul Shadowhunter standalone book, which was like a nice one-off, which took place literally. It was like the job he was doing right before the Phantom Menace took place. So, there's not a lot of his backstory that you could explore in a comic book that I would say would make him any more interesting than Rebels has. I mean, I kind of like what Rebels have done. I mean, I'm not like, if somebody gave me the character and said, what would you do with it? Wouldn't necessarily be what I would do with it. But, giving that he had you're dealing with a character that got cut in half, during his first appearance in a Star Wars things. And they've constantly been kind of, coming up with reasons why he's not dead. I don't know. I'm actually I'm not excited, but I actually think I'm going to give this one a try. I mean, if you want to we want to kind of trade off, it's like, you'll read Aftermath 3 and I'll read the Darth Maul series, and then we'll come together and talk about it. We could probably do something like that, because it's like, at least, if it's kind of like a one-off. I mean, is this a limited series, or is it just now they're just going to start having a Darth Maul pre-Phantom Menace series? I don't know.
I think this is meant to be a limited run series. I think. Everything I'm reading calls this a mini series. So this is going to be more like Princess Leia, or Lando, or Han Solo, or Chewbacca, in that way.
Yeah, I mean.
I think we've talked about the plot of it, right? Where it's like, it's pre-episode 1. Darth Maul is just like all itching to fight the Jedi, but Darth Sidious won't let him. And so then he finds some Padawan hidden away on some other planet. And so he's like, finally I get to kill a Jedi. And then that's what he does. Right. And so it's like, I don't know. If you like the character of Darth Maul, it may be something up your alley, but it just doesn't strike me as it seems a little bit more like the Chewbacca comic, which was fine. I mean, I thought the Chewbacca comic looked great and the story was okay, but it was such like a low stakes kind of, it was fine.
Yeah, that's always the problem with these kind of things.
I mean, and for a Chewbacca, a character that he's not like my favorite character. I don't have I'm not obsessed with Chewbacca, but I like him as a character. Okay. They do pretty good stuff with him, so that I might be more willing to read a comic miniseries that's just okay. Whereas, Maul, a character that I don't really care about, I'm like, I don't know, especially after reading the Obi-Wan and Anakin miniseries and seeing what that was like, again, with this pair of characters that I was like, well, it's fine, but I don't know. I just,
I know exactly where you're coming from.
I don't want to end up reading this thing just so we can talk about it in the show. If all we're going to do is just be like, it was okay. It wasn't
right.
Great.
And I mean, and going back to the conversation that we had kind of last week, where we talked a little bit about kind of the idea that maybe Star Wars comics are kind of carrying the load for a lot of other issues in a lot of other titles in the Marvel stable. It's kind of interesting that they would already kind of be like, it's like, I like what they're doing with Aphra, because it's like, it's young and it feels like, it kind of feels in the moment of this kind of new understanding of Star Wars and the rebooting of the universe or whatever. And they can tie in, and it feels a little bit like they're going backwards and kind of like, it's like, if there's like a low stakes character that, it's like, the thing with Aphra, she could, okay, yeah, her series on Vader ended with her supposed fake, her death or fake death or whatever. But that's a real character because she could die. They could, do a 10, 12, 15 issue run and then decide to kill the character off. So it's part of the reason why I keep reading. With the Maul thing, it's like, oh, well, we know nothing's going to happen to him. He's never going to come up against, nobody's going to know who he is because they can't reveal him till the Phantom Menace. So yeah, it feels low stakes. It feels like a bit like treading water when they have the regular Star Wars title and the Aphra title. And is there anything else currently running other than the Maul?
No, so it's the Star Wars title, Poe Dameron, Aphra, and now Darth Maul.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd pick. It's it should
what
Yeah. I mean, obviously they can't touch. I feel like it's Han and Leia, except in very measured ways, and especially Luke post Jakku. It's like that's just like they did. I guess obviously Lucasfilm doesn't want anybody touching that era at all.
Yeah, I mean, for me, right, Darth Maul is a recognizable character, so it'll help sales that way, or it won't hurt at least, and. It is that prequel era, so it can kind of guard them. I don't know that this was explicitly their thinking, but this is certainly a benefit, right? That it kind of guards them against the criticism that they're ignoring the prequels, right? So it's kind of their way of acknowledging that, okay, we have these multiple eras of Star Wars now. We have people who enjoy the original trilogy era. We have people who enjoy the prequel era. We have people who enjoy the ancient era, the new sequel trilogy era, right? And so, the people who like the original trilogy era, they're getting these they're getting these comics that take place in between episodes 4 and 5. And for the prequel era folks, we'll give them, the Obi-Wan and Anakin comic. We'll give them this Darth Maul comic. We'll make sure that these kind of multiple pools of Star Wars fans, maybe each get something and feel like they have stuff to buy. If I want to be crass about it, or they have Star Wars that's being made for them. If I want to be less crass about it. So yeah, I mean, I think it's. But you're right. It doesn't really feel like a new story, right? Like even with the Obi-Wan and Anakin comic, that was sort of like, all right, it's kind of a new, right? We haven't really seen, they had some novels. I know they had novels of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, but I don't know if they must have had a couple novels in the old EU about.
Greg Bear did one, and it was kind of a big deal because it was something to do with like Anakin's, like the first time he actually had to take a life was in that book. So some people kind of like, and then it also, one of the Creech, like, I forget how it ended. It was something like, it actually tied into what they had been doing in the New Jedi Order. It was like some kind of living planet or something, and it turned out that book actually connects to the end of the Yuuzhan Vong ordeal or something. So yeah, there has been an Anakin and did I see Anakin and Obi-Wan? There was the Approaching Storm. That was a pre-episode 2 book. So yeah, they've gone into that, but they never were books that were like, people were like, oh yeah, you got to read that one.
Right. But, to your point, this Darth Maul story doesn't really feel like a new story, right? It doesn't really feel, it doesn't seem to match up with this idea of this new kind of canon, new Disney Lucasfilm era of like, oh, we're going to tell new stories about these characters. It's like this definitely feels like an idea that, it seems like a bit of a rehash of like, okay, well, we're not really sure what to do with this character because he's in Rebels, so we can't really touch him during that period, and he was already in the Clone Wars, so we can't really touch him during that period. So, it's either pre-episode 1 or I guess when he was even younger. But how interesting is that going to be of like, a 10 or 12-year-old Darth Maul running around, or whatever his name was previously. I don't.
It was Dave.
I'm sure they said
it was Dave Maul.
Dave
Maul.
Yeah,
it's that
right.
Kind of...
So it's like, if they want to do a Darth Maul thing, this is kind of the logical time period to do it in. And at the same time, it's like, they've kind of already done this though, and so I don't know what this comic is going to bring. That's going to be that new story that they're telling to kind of justify doing this.
Yeah, it's an odd pick of all the stories that haven't been told.
I mean, again, I recognize, like, okay, it's a recognizable character. You're going to get people who love Darth Maul who are going to be into it. Or, maybe they're not super into Darth Maul, but they recognize it. They're not huge. They're just getting into Star Wars and they recognize this character from the movie. So, I'll buy his comic. But from like a storytelling perspective, I don't know what there is to see here that's new.
Exactly. Yeah. Are you going to be reading any of these young adult books that are coming out? Yeah. I didn't know about these.
I don't know. Yeah. So these were announced recently. There's going to be a young adult novel called Rebel Rising, which is about Jyn Erso's childhood being raised by Saw Gerrera. And then there's a book for even younger readers, I think. It's called like a young reader book about Baze and Chirrut, about their life on Jedha post Imperial takeover, and then when Saw shows up and has this idea like, should they go with him or should they do their own thing? The Jyn Erso novel I may read. I don't have anything against young adult novels per se, and the ones I've read so far, the Star Wars ones, Across the Stars was good, and the Ahsoka one was pretty good. So, I'll probably read that one. The Baze and Chirrut one, as much as I would like to, I think that may be a little below. It may be a little too far below my reading level.
Yeah, it'll be a little
for me to really. Again, like, I'll be curious to see what it says, but I don't think reading it as a book, it's going to really hold my interest.
I find it, without actually reading any synopsis, I find it interesting that Lucasfilm is, they parse some of these stories out to the young adult stuff. It's like, okay, well, when young adult isn't young enough, when you want a story about two, friends and a religious oppression by an evil empire, let's make it like a really young kid's book. It's kind of weird.
I was thinking about that too, and maybe I'll shoot Pablo Hidalgo at a Twitter question about this. But how do they decide whether a particular story is, if they say, okay, we're going to make this into a book rather than a comic book or anything else, right? If we're going to make a book about this, is this a young adult novel? Is this, just a older, I hate saying adult novel, but, is this a novel? Is it a young adult novel? Is it a book for younger readers? Is it, a picture book? Like, how do they make that decision? Is it that the person comes to them and says, hey, I have an idea for a young adult novel? Or is it, hey, we have this story idea. Should we make it a young adult novel or should we make it something else? I don't know how that works. And so, I'd be curious to know, because it does seem a little odd, the Baze and Chirrut story. I mean, I could even see that being like a comic miniseries about, their life on Jedha, and then the Empire shows up and they have to figure out what to do. And then they meet up with Saw and that, forces them to make some decisions. But, especially, like you said, this kind of religious oppression, this evil empire, and how do they write that for, 8, 10, 12-year-olds? Well, probably 8 to 10-year-olds. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and it's like, okay, we get the Maul miniseries, but you get a Baze and Chirrut like book for 9-year-olds or something. I maybe it'll bear out differently when we actually stuff, but I question their wisdom on that. But what do I know?
Yeah.
So
I'm sure they have some kind of market research that suggests which of these things would be successful for what media. I don't know.
Yeah. So you feel good about putting a pin in it around there?
Yeah, I think we've caught up on a lot of news this week.
Yeah, we didn't cover the things we didn't cover, which I don't really. We could talk about some of the time. Did you see that thing with Mark Hamill's kind of? I don't want to use the word rant because he was answering a question. It wasn't like he didn't just come out of the woodwork and start complaining about prequel haters and people that picked on Jake Lloyd. It was kind of I was telling my brother this. It was kind of like watching Mark Hamill kind of start to touch on his inner cantankerous old dude thing. He was very bent out of shape about it, which I mean I appreciate. He kind of said that I don't know if you've ever seen the People versus George Lucas documentary.
I have not.
It's an interesting. Sometimes it'll show up on streaming sites and stuff for included with your subscription. I would take the 90 minutes and watch it just only because it's an interesting meditation on how much Star Wars fans think they own the property. And I would say that even I have fallen into that over time when I get very opinionated about stuff. But Mark Hamill, not Luke. Mark Hamill kind of had said, they tried to get me to be in that thing, which they didn't call it at the time. They didn't call it the People versus George Lucas, and they had an agenda, and he was seemed very angry about that. But the one thing I will take away from this is that, so in passing, he says, I have my issues with George. And it's like, I never took it to mean anything other than any issue that two human beings that have known each other for as long as they have with each other. Mm-hmm. Like, maybe, it could be anything from like, when we go out to dinner, he picks a really expensive restaurant and then sits me with the bill, or, he doesn't send me, or it could be he doesn't send me a birthday card. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But people have now taken it like, Hamill admits he's had issues with Lucas over the years. And it just goes to show you, it's like, when you read a little snippet of something, if it's possible to go and see the actual interview, it's like, it's much different. I wouldn't say that, even me, I feel bad now even saying like Luke, Mark being a cantankerous old dude, but I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just I actually kind of like it that he's like, he said things about the prequels back in the day and had his own theories why they didn't work. But I don't think he was ever a person who was just like, oh boy, they completely screwed the pooch on these movies.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference too between creative tension and creative disagreements over dialogue or whatever else, right. And like, oh man, I can't stand that guy. And I feel like a lot of time, not just with Mark Hamill and George Lucas, but in a lot of these, actors, directors, things, people reporting on them, to get clicks or whatever, they'll kind of conflate the two, and it's like, oh, we just had creative disagreements or whatever, and it's like, well, I mean, So when Harry Shearer got fired from Saturday Night Live, or when he quit Saturday Night Live, whatever, I don't know if this line's true. It might be apocryphal, but he left the show, and Saturday Night Live said, "Oh, there were creative differences," and someone asked Harry Shearer about it, and he said, "Yeah, or about him and Lorne Michaels, creative differences with Lorne Michaels," and he said, "Yeah, I was creative and he was different." Right, and I feel like a lot of people assume creative differences, that's just code for they couldn't get along, and maybe that's true a lot of times, but sometimes creative disagreements are really just about, you think it should be written this way, I think it should be written that way. That doesn't necessarily mean that they hate each other. It just means they disagree about how the movie should have gotten made. And I have a feeling that that's closer to the story here.
And the one last thing I'll say before we say our goodbyes, did you know that yesterday was the 20th anniversary of the Star Wars Special Edition's release?
I saw, Pablo Hidalgo said, "Oh, today's the 20th anniversary, or 20 years ago today, you all started arguing about the special editions."
Right.
So
That's the guy who just said on Twitter that anybody that calls the new Dune movie a quote reboot is dumb or something. No, he said calling it is dumb. He didn't call people dumb. But I was like, I was literally checking our thing to see if there's any breaking news. I'm like, how many times did we call it a reboot today?
Yeah,
I don't care. Yeah, I don't care. We're being extemporaneous. But anyway, 20 years, and it's kind of it's interesting. It's like the passage of time, and I remember how like getting in line and getting off of work early to go get in line to go see it, and all the excitement. It was kind of like, it kind of makes me wonder, it's like, if we'll ever see any Star Wars movies get re-released in theaters. Now that we're getting to the point where there's going to be, now there's 8 of them. There's going to be 9 of them. There's going to be 11 of them, I guess, all told, announced. And it's like, they'll never be able to, maybe they'll re-show, because Fox owns, A New Hope. Supposedly the Fox owns it in perpetuity. So they actually make the decision when that movie is released on video, and they, the way it's licensed, and which, apparently, which we hadn't covered, there was a little talk that Rian Johnson had said that he has heard that Lucasfilm just did a 4K restoration of A New Hope, which he didn't speak to as which version of it is. I really hope it's the original, but
it's going to be the special edition. That's the official version now.
Yeah, I know. I gotta shut up about it. I just feel like I can't come. It's 20 years of me complaining about this. It's the 20th anniversary of me complaining. Although, somebody in what was it? The guys on the Toy Run podcast, actually, they just did a special about the toys of the special edition, and I think Jake Stevens, one of the co-hosts, mentioned like that all that complaints about this changes, that didn't come the first week. It didn't come the first month. It came like 6 months later. It's like, he goes, everybody was really excited about it when it came out. It took a while for us to all go, Jabba didn't look that good. And why was Boba Fett looking at the screen? And it's like, I don't like the fact that, Greedo shoots first now. But when it first came out, everybody was over the moon. I'm sure I went and saw just the first one. I just saw A New Hope. I must have seen it like 5 times in its re-release in the theater. So I basically, 20 years ago, I was going to the movies a lot. I ate a lot of popcorn. Yeah. But I think that's all we got for this week. I will say, if you want to reach out and talk to us, we have the same email as we have every week. It's hosts. That's host with an S at the end, at talkingbirdcast.com. We are on Twitter at talkingbirdcast.com. Our website is www.talkingbirdcast.com. If you want to use our Amazon affiliate link. And I do want to thank you guys. So it's the 1st of February today. So thanks to your guys using that link. The January 2017, that our hosting was paid for by you guys using the link. And that means a lot to me, and I want to thank you for doing it. And it's www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon, and it works real simply, and we always appreciate when you use it. Did you have anything that you wanted to add?
No.
All right.
Talk to you all soon.
Yeah, for Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
I'm still John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.